Yeah, it certainly sounds extraordinary, the power that it has. And I'm also curious about how does people's physical embodiment shift? Have you got any stories you can share of people who seem to have completely changed the way they're holding themselves in the world, the way they interact in the world more widely, because their embodiment's changing as a result of doing the TM practice?
You've just reminded me, actually, in talking about how people hold themselves. In fact, you know, often things crop up. People tend to come to learn for a particular reason. So I've got anxiety, or I've got high blood pressure, or I want more energy, or I want to unleash my creativity, or some such thing. But often, as well as those changes, come about some things which people weren't expecting. And in you mentioning there about the way that people hold themselves, you just reminded me of one particular gentleman who came back to a meeting, because we offer free ongoing support for life, where people can come back to meetings and check in with us about how their practice is going, and continue to understand what they're experiencing. And one thing that people wouldn't necessarily consider is, as you say, the way you hold yourself, and what's, having a bad back, or a bad something, some physical structure in the body on that level. And this gentleman, when he learnt, I'd forgotten, he came back to a meeting and said, "Oh, do you remember actually when I came to learn a few months ago, I had a walking stick?" And I said, "Oh yeah, I remember
Wow.
that." And he said, it was just that, just his awareness. And we talk about this mind-body connection. Well, the fact that the unity of mind and body. When what we're doing is bringing back the communication between mind and body. That flow of communication has been interfered with by the stress in the body. So as we dissolve stress, communication increases naturally, without any effort or purpose. Yes, there are lots of amazing techniques and different things that we can do on all levels in all sorts of ways to address specific problems. But as I said, spontaneously, this was one example of a gentleman suddenly finding that because he was changing the way that he was walking and holding himself, the whole physical structure of his body changed, and he no longer needed a walking stick to walk.
That is phenomenal. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah. And in terms of, again, that communication between mind and body, we see it with things like addiction. We're all addicted to, as human beings, most human beings are addicted to something, but and we see it in the case of things like alcohol, or even just smoking, that things start to drop away spontaneously because of that mind-body connection, of people coming back even on the second or third day of the course sometimes saying, "Oh, I didn't want my coffee this morning. That was strange. I didn't want my cigarette this morning." It just spontaneously drops away.
Wow.
And this is why, again, just coming back to this body of knowledge of Ayurveda, when Deepak Chopra was asked on a film clip back in the 80s, what would you say of all the recommendations in Ayurveda of how to heal the body? Think about your body type and how to live, how to eat, how to exercise, and body massages and techniques. And of all the things, what would you say if you had one piece of health advice, just one piece of health advice? What would it be? And he said, practice transcendental meditation, because as you re-enliven that communication between mind and body, the body starts to heal, and these recommendations that we all know on some level there's a lot of common sense understanding of what we should be doing. The key is, how do we do that? Set up a New Year's resolution where we decide, right, I'm not going to smoke, I'm not going to drink, I'm going to exercise and do all these things I know I should be doing. And of course, New Year's resolutions often fail a few weeks in, because we just because of our emotions and how we're feeling, we revert back to old patterns and ways of behaving and rigid ways of behaving, which the stress in the body has ground us into. So as we start to loosen that stress, get more flexibility in the body, and establish that mind-body connection again, those things start to drop away. We actually start to feel adverse to having that caffeine or that cigarette, or that, just spontaneously.
And I think there's a social thing going on as well. We're quite certainly within Western society, we're very much rewarded for being in our heads, not for being in our bodies. We constantly thinking, and there's doing, but it's all very much driven by the brain. And so I think getting that reconnection, where we're not suddenly cut off at the neck, which so many of us seem to be, and getting that reconnection through, it feels really critical. But it's actually quite countercultural still.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And as I say, the great thing with TM is it becomes spontaneous to re-establish that connection without any effort or strain. It's spontaneous, and we haven't lost it. It's just a case of remembering, just a case of re-enlivening that intelligence. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier on, Gemma, about the research that you did as part of both of your, all of your studies into TM and anxiety and depression. I'd love for you to share a little bit with us about what you found, if there's anything that might be useful for people to be aware of.
Well, my earliest research, that's quite some years ago now, but it was on occupational stress, and that really did support the findings that had already been established about how, well, in fact, relating to some of the benefits we've already talked about, how if you put that in a workplace setting, it's a very useful skill for the workforce to have. One is, obviously, if we're improving health and well-being, then we have less absenteeism. We also become more productive, more efficient at our work. And again, thinking about how stress affects our ability to function, it affects the executive functions of the brain, and so we can't think so clearly, we lose that clarity, we can't make decisions so easily, we lose our creativity. As we dissolve stress, all of that comes back, and so we become more productive in the workforce. And also relationships within the workforce are important. Relationships start to improve spontaneously as we come out of meditation more calm, more rested. We have more time, more patience, more tolerance with colleagues and family and everybody around us. And so these were the kinds of effects that I saw in a workplace where they had some of the workforce were practicing TM, some weren't. It was looking at measures, looking at the difference between those, and there was things like, say, decreased absenteeism, increased job satisfaction, improved relationships with co-workers and colleagues and things, all those kinds of things you'd expect, and able to being more productive and more creative in their work, all things that are important in the workplace. When I did my doctorate, I went on to, as I mentioned, look at the effects of TM on anxiety, depression and well-being. And that was interesting. Again, whilst it supported existing research, it also added to the existing research through a qualitative side. We're all very familiar with the quantitative side, looking at statistics and taking measures and things, but the qualitative side has become more of interest over the years amongst researchers. And so I did a mixed study where I not only took measures of anxiety, depression and well-being, but also interviewed people about their experiences of learning to meditate, and on a few different points in time across 6 months, and married up the statistics with what people were saying. And some interesting things came out. There was not only group statistical significance, but also clinical significance, which is important when we're looking at mental health in the kind of clinical setting. People moving from a category of, when you do take these kinds of standardized measures, there'll be categories of a low clinical rating of being anxious or depressed, and moving into categories of improved or even recovered. So people are significantly moving up the categories and into the recovered position according to that measure. So statistical significance in both anxiety and depression decreasing, increase in well-being on a number of strands of a measure of well-being. And in terms of the qualitative side, some important things that came out were that people were particularly pleased. It was a client group who were, a number of, it was quite a small sample, because they were looked at in depth, but they were people who had tend to be people who had gone through the system several times. So you could consider, in the NHS, we'd probably call them treatment resistant, people who had gone through the process. So, they tried the medication, they tried the talking therapies, they tried lots of different things, and were still not feeling satisfied with their degree of recovery. And so it's interesting in that respect, that this can even penetrate what we'd call treatment resistant people. But also in terms of the narratives, again, people were particularly pleased to feel that autonomy in their own recovery. They felt they felt that it was within their control. They'd been given a technique, but I wasn't doing something to them. Well, not, it wasn't me doing the teaching actually, but where the course was run, that what they'd learnt, they didn't have something done to them. They were given a technique, a simple technique, and they went off and did it themselves. And it's their own daily practice, 20 minutes twice a day, sitting comfortably in a chair, eyes closed, very effortlessly thinking the mantra that produce these results. And you know, as I remember, you know, one or two of them saying, one in particular saying, "Aren't I clever? You know, I've actually done this myself. I've been the master of my own recovery." Which is quite refreshing when people are used to a system where they're dependent on another person to help them get well.
And I think you're right. That sounds amazing. It's that sense of self-empowerment. Actually, you're empowering them to take back some control, to feel that they had some agency in their recovery. And I think that can be really common, that people feel quite disempowered and done to. And it's, as you say, another thing's been done to me, and this has been done to me, and that's been done to me. None of it's working. And maybe there's something in there about the sense of empowerment that's also making a difference as well.